Well, welcome back. Let's take a little look. Let's save that there. Let's take a little look at our next shot, and that's going to be hand along wall. Okay, and again with the advanced over here, we do have a nice little time code going on here, but just for simplicity's sake, for you, I will be changing our frame to 1 there, and hit OK. V001. Okay, and again, as before, we'll take a look at our footage. Now, this is a fairly tricky bit of footage because we have to deal with quite a lot of changes in scale. We deal with changes in perspective, and we deal with a significant amount of motion blur. So what we want to do is we want to be tracking this wall in here. So now normally I would say start with the best frame and work your way backwards and forwards as we've done in the previous ones. I want to show you one thing we can do with Mocha Pro, and I want to show you it starting at frame 1. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating one giant shape here. So again, come to the X-Spline tool, come up and zoom out just a little bit here. Right click on the control here, and I can stretch out so all of my points within this spline are now square. And I'm going to come over to my layer now here and call this wall track. Now I want to track this entire wall, so let's take a look at what we're going to be doing. So input channel, luminance or auto channel. Well, the luminance is pretty good. The luminance difference in this is pretty good, so I'm going to leave it on luminance. Minimum percentage of pixels used, this is down to 20%. We've got a huge frame. We've taken in a huge shape on it. So Mocha saying start with 20%, work your way from there. Okay, so under motion, let's take a look at the motion of the wall here. So the wall moves from being around about here to being around about there instead, and also scaling down quite significantly. So this movement itself could be handled with the in a sort of distort corner pin sort of way. So with the shear command available within Mocha Pro. But here's where things start getting a little bit different. Now, we can also turn on perspective. Now, perspective is really useful in situations where you have a flat plane, something like a computer screen, or in this example, this wall, where it's doing significant sorts of distortion, such as the movement that you're seeing with this wall. So there is a very, very clear perspective shift, and turning on the perspective motion here is going to give us a more accurate result than just the shear. Though in a lot of cases, if it's just a smaller amount of movement that we're working with on a flat surface, the shear is going to be absolutely fine and render through a little bit more quickly. But in this case, the perspective is going to be fantastic to use because we've got a flat surface that's moving significantly in perspective over time. So it's doing, scale this back up. So it's doing a significant change in perspective rather than something the shear will be very good for is just where it's doing smaller stuff going in here, or if it wasn't a flat surface, which we will see in just a few moments. Now I'm going to turn my mattes back on for a second, and again, as normal, turn this down a little bit. I'm going to change the color of my matte here by going to my overlay colors, coming to selected. I'm going to choose a lovely green. There we go. Now we're going to leave the rest of the stuff here set as default. So let's see what happens when we try and track this through. The problem we've got is we've got contamination in our shape from this hand here, because the hand is not coplanar. It's not sharing the same motion as the wall. The wall only has motion because the camera is moving. The hand has motion because the camera is moving and the hand is also moving independently. So these are not coplanar. So if we keep this giant shape just the way it is here, the movement of the hand is going to throw off the data that we're getting from the wall. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to block out this hand. And we can do that fairly simply and fairly straightforwardly by creating another shape and using that as a track mat. So let's show you what that's going to do. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make a very loose X-spline. Really, really loose X-spline around this hand here. And I'm going to call this, unsurprisingly, hand track. And I absolutely want to track this. Let's have a look at how I want to track this. Luminance, yep, I'm happy about that. Minimum percentage of the pixels, 20%. If that's what you think, Mocha, we're going to go with you. Motion, well, yes, it's translating. As you can see, it's moving around. It's also scaling and rotating as the camera scales and rotates. We've also got this little shift in perspective as the camera moves around as well. But this is not a perspective shift in the same way as the wall was a perspective shift. This is something that should be handled by shear. So this is a movement where the surface itself here is not flat, and it's not showing that significant and sort of telltale perspective shift that the wall is showing. And also, the hand is also moving slightly here. So if we turn perspective on here, that's going to send the wrong message to Mocha Pro when it tries to do the calculations. So shear here is exactly what we need. All right, but how does that help us? Let's come back to our wall track and have a look. So if I come to my mats here, at the moment I've got selected mats turned on. I can turn all mats on and have a little look at that. But having that set to green is a very bad idea. Let's have that set to a blue instead and turn that up a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. Okay, so that's all mats. I'm going to show selected track mats, and what this is going to do is it's going to show us what's actually happening. So whenever we have one layer above another, it is going to cut out that layer from the layers below, and that means that we can now use this hand track in conjunction with this wall track to cut out this part from the calculations. So let's try and retrack the wall. And now you can see that the motion of the hand is not contaminating the results that we're getting from the wall. So I'm getting a much more accurate result coming in from the wall. Obviously, it's taking a longer time to process it out because not only does it have to track a large shape, but it's now having to track two of them. So I'm going to keep expanding my wall out here. I'm just going to also be checking to make sure that nothing of significance pokes out from my hand here. So I'm happy to keep this mat nice and loose because I've, also only using 20% of the pixels coming through in this huge shape. So that's all fine. And let's just quickly process that out. Okay, now as the shape gets smaller in the screen, I've got a couple of different choices to make. I can either keep expanding this out here so that it keeps filling up as much of the information as we can get, so we can get a nice accurate track going on, or I could turn up the minimum percentage of pixels used as well, and that would also help me get a much more accurate result. Now we're going to have another significant problem coming in here, because we're going to have this part of the girl's body coming in and blocking out our wall as well. So what are we going to do? Yep, that's right, we're going to create yet another track matte over the top. So again, keep it fairly loose. If you remember, in the opening part of this chapter, we talked about how the back arm here was not coplanar with the body here, because the movement of the back arm is slightly different to the movement of the body. Now in this case, when we're just using it as a track matte, that's not going to have much significance going on at all. So I'm happy to create one big shape for my body track there. And do I need this to start any earlier? No, I don't. So I'm going to come in, set the in point of this layer to the current frame, and come back to my wall track so I can see what's happening with my track mattes. Make sure that everything's working out as it's meant to. Come in there. Notice that I left the default settings for the body track because it's going to be set up to be working on the luminance, and the minimum percentage of pixels used is going to be rather low, which it needs to be because it's a large image there. So I'm confident that that's fine. Okay, I'm just going to stop this here again, not only to carry on making my wall shape bigger, I'm going to come in and just adjust the hand here as well, because the hand's moving fairly significantly and different parts of the hand are moving in different ways, so it's actually rather tricky for this to get a sort of consistent motion going on. So it's nice and loose. Keep tracking. Notice that when I created the track mattes, I only created mattes that were large enough just to fit over where it was I was actually wanting to mask out. So try and keep those as small as you can. Great, well that's all of our tracks done, so let's turn off the tracking on all of the layers and the visibility on our body track and our hand track. Let's come to a decent area here, turn our matte shape off, turn our surface on, and here we are, we're coming up to the moment of truth to see whether this has actually worked out the way we want it to. So I'll turn my spline layers off as well, come to this area here. I know we've still got a significant bit of motion blur going on, but should be good enough. Let's try and line our wall up. I'm looking over here on the door. So we really don't have all that much information about the wall here. So, you know, kind of just there's a little bit of working by eye here, of course. And come in, insert my clip, insert my logo, and let's play that back. I can see the perspective is wrong, but that's going to be a consequence of this grid not being perfectly lined up. It's very tricky because we actually don't have very many visual cues about where things are in perspective. So there's a whole load of guesswork going on here. Let's see if that's any better. We can see one thing. We can see that actually the track itself is pretty much spot on, even when we're coming really, really close. In fact, this might be the only visual cue we've got is this line down here. So let's use that. And hope for the best. So you see, because the surface is defining the wall here, we can stretch this out and play around with this to our heart's content. And there's no keyframes on the surface, not in this track here. In this track module here, there's absolutely no keyframes on the surface. So basically, whatever we do, that's still not quite right. It does look like it's sort of stuck out from the wall a little bit. Here we go. Yeah, so what I was saying, there's no keyframes on the surface as such. Basically, all of this is being driven by the track. So we can play around and mess around with the surface as much as we want to, and it's still going to be, driven by the track rather than by any other keyframes we set on the surface there. And that's actually holding pretty tight. So what I wanted to show you here was just how we can really play fast and loose with the shape that we're using to track. We can set, a number of different keyframes on this wall shape as and when turn that back on, as and when we required it. So as the shape changed and got bigger, we're able to keep keyframing this shape up, and Mocha was still going in and sort of churning through and working out the overall perspective and the overall transformation that was happening within this shape. So that's completely unlike a point tracker where, if you are going to move the shape around from place to place, you have to start to sort of do some kind of crazy compensation, especially when you're working on such big areas and such big changes. The other thing I wanted to show you was the significance of being able to use track mats to basically cut out areas that are going to be creating problems for the thing you actually want to track. So we were able to quickly create a couple of track mats in here, and using those to block out the areas that the hand and the body was going to sort of change on the wall, we were able to get a very highly accurate track in almost no time flat. Great, well that's it for this exercise. In the next exercise, we are going to be looking at how we fine-tune a track that goes a little bit awry. We already looked about how we deal with small errors by sort of being able to retrack them and hopefully fixing it that way. But if that doesn't work, we're going to have to use different methods. And that's what we're going to be looking at in the next exercise.